Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tools for Financial Caregivers of Older Adults webinar. We are so happy to have everyone here join us. My name is Desiree Lapahi. I am a member of the Navajo Nation. I am the data analyst here at NICOA, but today I will be your moderator. Now, a little housekeeping note for all of you out there. For any questions that you have, please put it in the chat box and we will get to them after the presentation. Okay. Today, we have an exciting speaker here with us. Her name is Lisa Schifferle. Lisa is a senior policy analyst in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, also known as the CFPB. She worked out of the Office for Older Americans. Her career in consumer protection spans more than 20 years. Before coming to the CFB, she spent 12 years at the Federal Trade Commission, where she trained consumers, business, and advocates on scams, identity theft, and cybersecurity. She also served as the FTC's identity theft coordinator and litigated fraud and data security cases. Before that, Ms. Schifferle spent 8 years at the Maryland Legal Aid Bureau representing low-income clients in consumer, bankruptcy, housing, public benefits, and employment cases. Without further ado, here is Lisa.
Thanks, Desiree, and thanks so much to NICOA for inviting me to speak today about financial caregiving. It's a pleasure to be here to speak on this important topic. Right now, as you know, millions of Americans are managing money or property for a loved one who is unable to do so. And with the coronavirus pandemic, many more of us may be called upon to act as financial caregivers in the coming months. So I'm going to talk to you about some resources that the CFPB has to support financial caregivers and people who are working with financial caregivers. These are some resources that can help you start conversations with loved ones or plan for your own caregiving needs. So caregiving is something really none of us want to talk about or think about, but it's very important to discuss no matter what your situation is. So we're going to give you some tools for doing that now. On the next slide, please, you'll see a disclaimer, which I'm required to give, which is just that this presentation, anything I say is my opinion and does not necessarily represent the Bureau's views. On the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. If you're not familiar with us, we are a national consumer protection agency formed about 10 years ago. And our mission is to regulate consumer financial products and services, and also to educate and empower people to make better informed financial decisions. Now, I work in the Office for Older Americans, and on the next slide, we have a little description of my office. And basically what we do in the Office for Older Americans is to develop resources to help protect older consumers from financial harm, and also to help older consumers make sound financial decisions as they get older. We also help stakeholders by providing tools to support long-term financial security for older adults. So we're here as part of that mission today. Today, I'm going to focus on a product that we call Managing Someone Else's Money and our series of guides about managing someone else's money and other tools for financial caregivers. Before I begin, I just want to start by setting the stage on the next slide, which talks about the fact that financial caregiving is challenging. Anyone who's taking care of someone, whether they're older or not, knows that it can be very draining. In addition to caring for their physical needs, if you're caring for their financial needs, it can be very stressful, even if you're financially savvy yourself. You'll see in these two quotes here, Kristen says she is financially savvy, but doesn't know where to get help in terms of managing someone else's money. And Hector says that, he basically feels more responsibility for someone else's affairs rather than his own. And that can be very overwhelming. So that's why the CFPB has created these guides to help you through this if you are managing someone else's money, and to help prevent elder financial exploitation. So on the next slide, you'll see they're called the Managing Someone Else's Money Guides for Financial Caregivers. And the following slide shows what you'll see if you go to consumerfinance.gov/MSEM. That's where you can find these guides. There's a video that will introduce you to the guides and tell you a little bit more about how some people use them. But basically what the guides do is they help financial caregivers. They provide tips and resources to help you protect, invest, and manage money for a loved one. They also include information on identifying benefits that the care recipient might be eligible for, whether it's disability, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, housing assistance, or otherwise. The guides also describe warning signs of financial exploitation and how to watch out for scams, and provide information on where to get help. Now, in creating these guides, the CFPB worked very closely with the American Bar Association's Commission on Law and Aging so that we can make sure that all of the law is accurate. Now, on the next slide, you'll see what the Managing Someone Else's Money guides look like, and I'll go through a lot of the content for you. We have guides for 4 different types of financial caregivers. There's agents under power of attorney, guardians, trustees, and government benefits fiduciaries. And I'll explain what each of these means and why you might want to consider one over the other. But first, let's talk about what is a fiduciary. A fiduciary is just a legal term that's used for a financial caregiver. It's basically anyone who's named to manage money or property for someone else. And if you are a fiduciary, you have certain duties, which I'll discuss. But first, let's talk about how these fiduciary duties are established. For power of attorney, you'd be named in a legal document. For guardians, or in some cases, they're called conservatives, you're named in the court. For trustees, it's a legal document. And for Social Security and VA, you'd be named by that particular agency. Now, what's power of attorney? Like I said, power of attorney is a legal document, and this is probably the most important one to talk about and know about. It is a great tool for planning for the unexpected, and we all should be doing this. I know we often think of our parents or grandparents as older people, but it's important also to start thinking about ourselves and planning for the unexpected for ourselves. So it's good for everyone to have a power of attorney in place in case the unexpected happens. What the power of attorney does is basically someone known as the principal gives someone else known as the agent legal authority to make decisions about their money or property if something happens to them. If you get in a car accident, if you have a stroke, if you're somehow otherwise unable to manage your own finances. In some states, these documents are called the durable power of attorney. The important thing to know about them is there are 2 main types of power of attorney. There's a healthcare power of attorney and there's a financial power of attorney. A lot of people get confused that there's more than one and you need 2 documents to establish all these rights. We recently had this come up when my father-in-law was sick and in the hospital, and my husband realized that he only had a healthcare power of attorney, not a financial power of attorney in place. He just said, oh, I have a power of attorney, it's all taken care of. But it's important to realize that you need 2 documents: healthcare power of attorney, which covers who can make healthcare decisions for you, and then a financial power of attorney, which covers who can make financial decisions for you. Now let's talk a little bit about what a representative payee is. This is a different kind of fiduciary. On the next slide. Yes, thanks. Basically, a representative payee is what Social Security calls someone who manages Social Security benefits for someone else. And VA fiduciary is what the Veterans Administration uses as a term for someone who manages veterans benefits. So if someone is getting Social Security benefits and they're not able to manage their finances themselves, then someone will be appointed as a representative payee. Same with VA benefits. The important thing to know about this type of fiduciary is they only manage those particular government benefits. They do not have authority to manage anything else of the person's financial affairs. So if I'm representative payee for my mother's Social Security benefits, I can't manage her house or her bank accounts or anything else unless I have another type of arrangement in place, like a power of attorney or guardianship or one of the other ones we're discussing. But these government benefits fiduciaries, your rights and responsibilities only extend to the particular government benefits. Now on the next slide, let's talk about what is a guardian of the property. A guardian is when a court, rather than a legal document, I mentioned before the power of attorney is a legal document you can establish to plan for the future. But the guardian of property will happen if you do not have a power of attorney in place, and say something happens like a car accident, and that car accident leaves you in a coma, which actually this happened to my grandmother. She did not have a power of attorney in place, and so we had to go to court in order to get my uncle named as the guardian. Again, showing the importance of having things like a power of attorney, because the court process can be more expensive and cumbersome. But what the guardianship does, or in some states it's called a conservatorship, is the court goes in and names someone to manage that person's money if it finds that that person can't manage it alone. So first they'll have to determine that person to be incapacitated and unable to manage their finances, and then they'll pick the person. So as you can see, this gives you less control over the situation. You don't get to pick who's managing your money and property. Again, showing why, the power of attorney is a good planning document. It gives you more control over the situation than guardianship does. Now on the next slide, we'll talk about a trustee and what is a trustee. And our guides refer to trustees that are named in a legal document called the Revocable Living Trust. And basically in that document, we're talking about Martina because the guides just use Martina as an example of the person, but it could be anyone. So we'll just use the name Martina for purposes of this discussion since it's what's in the guide. And basically with the trustee type of fiduciary, Martina would sign a legal document called the Living Trust. And what that does is it transfers ownership of certain money and property to the trust. So she can decide just what she wants in the trust. She could just put her house in it. She could just put her car in it. She could just put $3,000 in it. And that's what the person gets to manage. They don't manage everything that Martina has. They just manage what she puts in the trust. So some people like this type of arrangement because, it gives them control over which items somebody else has authority to manage. It's important to recognize too that trustees and a lot of these fiduciaries, these are things that are not just helpful for rich people. It can be helpful for anyone. I know a lot of us hear of trusts and we think of people with millions of dollars, but trusts are really a tool that can be used for anyone, as can powers of attorney and fiduciaries like guardians. So what does it mean to be a fiduciary? On the next slide, we have some questions to pose. Really, the most important thing about being a fiduciary is to avoid conflicts of interest. And this slide raises some questions that might pose a conflict of interest. Like if you're a fiduciary for Martina, can you use her money to buy yourself a new phone? No, that would be a conflict of interest. That would be violating the duty to keep her money separate. Can you use her money to fix your car? Can you use her money to fix the roof of your home? No and no. And what about, can you give yourself a loan and pay it back later? Still no. It's very important to keep the money and property separate when you're managing someone else's money. On the next slide, you'll see the 4 key duties of a fiduciary. And those are, first, to act only in the person's best interest, like I described on the earlier slide. That means avoiding conflicts of interest. And the guide provides scenarios like the ones we discussed that might pose a conflict. Those ones on the last slide were pretty straightforward, but there are some more nuanced ones, like say, what if you buy a car with Martina's money and you mainly use the car to drive her to doctor's appointments, but you also used it for your own purposes? That may be a conflict. Or what if Martina has a leak in her roof and you hire your daughter to repair the roof? That may be a conflict if your daughter's not necessarily the best person to do that repair. So it's very important as a fiduciary to act in the person's best interest. The second is to manage the money and property carefully. And that usually includes compiling an inventory of money, property, of debt and debts that the person has, investing those carefully, and finding out whether the person is eligible for any other benefits. Also, keeping the person's money separate. I mentioned that before. One thing to note is to think about avoiding joint accounts. If you don't already have a joint account, joint accounts have unintended consequences. If you're managing money for a spouse and you have a joint account, then there's no need to go undo that joint account. But say I'm managing money for my mother and I think, oh, it'll be easier to just set up a joint account and then we can both write checks. Well, the problem with that is if she were to pass away with the joint account, the money in that account would go to me, and she might want it to go to me and my brother divided equally. Or if I got in a lot of debt, the creditors could come after her money or the money in the joint account for my debt. So I just mentioned that as an example because a lot of people think, oh, I'm just going to set up a joint account to make it easy. But that often has unintended consequences, and it's better to keep the money and property separate in separate accounts titled for the individual. And the guides tell you how to actually name bank accounts depending on whether you're a trustee or a guardian. Finally, keeping good records is an important duty of a fiduciary. That includes keeping receipts and notes, even for small expenses like groceries, and avoiding paying in cash so that you can keep a better record of it. This can also help with benefits determinations for public benefits and with power of attorney abuse cases in case somebody ever came after you and said you were abusing your power as power of attorney. So it's also important when thinking about these duties, if you are planning for the future and choosing a financial caregiver, think about who can do these duties best. It may not be the oldest child. It's also important to think about things like alcohol, drug use, mental health issues that might affect someone's ability to be a caregiver when you are considering who to name as your caregiver if you do create a power of attorney or other document setting up a caregiving relationship. Now on the next slide, you'll see that we have developed state-specific managing someone else's money guides. So far, I have talked about our national guides and what is common to the guides throughout the country, but we have developed state-specific guides based on state laws in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Oregon, and Virginia. We also worked with professionals in a number of other states listed at the bottom of the slide to create their own guides. And we are willing to work with people in other states that are not listed here to create guides in your states. We'd love to have a guide for every state and would love to have the help of professionals in those states to create them. And we have templates to make it easy, so it's not a heavy lift. If you are in a state and are wanting to create a guide for your state, we can help you with that. Now on the next slide, you'll see some information about where to find managing someone else's money. You can get the guides in bulk order for free. That means you can order as many as you want mailed to you. We have them in English and in Spanish, and that's the link there for bulk order. You can also download them from the website at consumerfinance.gov/MSEM. And if you have questions about the guides, or if you are interested in trying to create a guide for your state if it's not listed, then please reach out to Older Americans at CFPB.gov. So now let me talk a little bit about preventing financial exploitation on the next slide. So far, what I've talked about has mainly been how you as a financial caregiver can fulfill your fiduciary duties so you don't inadvertently or accidentally exploit someone who you're caring for. Because sometimes people do it with good intentions and accidentally do it. Sometimes people just abuse their power as a fiduciary. But also as a fiduciary, you have a duty to look out for financial exploitation that other people may be perpetrating on the person who you are caring for. So this slide shows some statistics about how big a problem financial exploitation is. One study found 2.9 billion was lost to financial exploitation in 2010, and then more recent study shows the number of suspicious activity reports filed between 2013 and 2019 to involve over $6 billion. And the average amount lost was about $34,000. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, because you'll see at the bottom, only about 1 in 44 cases are reported to authorities. So on the next slide, you'll see what are some of the warning signs of financial exploitation. Oh, I'm sorry. First, preventing financial exploitation. The guides go over the warning signs, which I'll discuss in a minute, as well as how to protect the person from scams, some common scams, and what to do if you expect financial abuse or exploitation. So on the next slide, we'll talk about those warning signs and some of the things to look out for if you're managing someone else's money and want to see if they are being financially exploited, is obviously if there's some money or property missing, that's a big red flag. But there also may be less obvious things like smaller changes in the person's spending or savings. Maybe they're going to the ATM a lot to make withdrawals. Maybe they're not able to pay bills that they usually were able to, or they're no longer getting their bills because someone else has rerouted it to their address. Or maybe they're adding names of new people in their lives and names you don't recognize, they're adding to bank accounts or to other financial accounts. Those are some things to look out for. The next slide has a few more warning signs. It can also be changes in the person's behavior, not just changes in their spending and savings. Maybe there's a new best friend or romantic interest who's suddenly very much involved in their finances, and the person is changing the beneficiaries of their will, life insurance, or retirement funds. Especially if you notice that that person seems, the person you're caring for seems afraid of this new person, relative, caregiver, or friend, or if you notice that that relative, caregiver, or friend is not letting the person, in this case we'll call her Martina, not letting her speak for herself, or seems to be controlling her decisions. Also, since we do know that physical exploitation and financial exploitation often go hand in hand, if you are aware of physical abuse, if you see signs, bruises, or other things of physical abuse or neglect, it's good to remember to look out for financial abuse as well, because they often happen at the same time, and vice versa. If you're seeing signs of financial abuse, keep an eye out to see if there are signs of physical abuse as well. So how can you protect Martina from scams? A few things are to put her on the do not call registry, which you can do at donotcall.gov. That just helps cut down on some of the numbers of calls that she'll get that may be scam calls. She's still going to get calls coming through, but that way at least you can tell her that the calls coming through are basically going to be the scam calls, because those are the scammers that are violating other laws and violating do not call registry. So do not call does help to avoid and identify some scams. Also, if you are a financial caregiver, it's important not to share Martina's numbers or passwords or for her accounts or her social security number. And also important to make sure that you yourself don't become a victim to scams. So to take time to compare prices and watch out for too good to be true deals so that you don't become a victim of a scam as well. And finally, to watch out for signs that the person you're caring for has already been scammed. And on the next slide, I'll point out some of the common scams that the guide goes over. A big one right now is a grandparent or imposter scam, where someone calls and says, "Grandma, I'm stuck in jail in another country and I need you to wire money right away." Or now with COVID, it could just be that, you know, I can't see you and I need you to wire money right away. So there are new twists on the grandparent scam. They ask you not to tell anyone, don't tell mom and dad. But really the important thing for older people to know is to try to verify that, check with mom or dad, check with the individual before sending any money. And big red flags for all these scams are is if the person has to wire money or put on a prepaid card or gift card, because those are the scammers' favorite tools and payment methods, because they know once the money is sent that way, it's very hard to get back. There are also charity scams where scammers set up to pretend to be a charity that they're not and then take your money. There are tax collection scams and a variety of other scams that happen by phone. On the next slide, you'll see a few more. Some of the big other ones affecting older adults are lottery and sweepstakes scams. So people will get something saying that they've won a prize or lottery, and all they have to do is pay taxes, fees, or customs in order to get their prize, but really they just pay the fee and never get the money. So that's an important scam to look out for. I know the New York lottery used to have a motto, you got to be in it to win it. So I think of it as if you haven't entered a particular lottery, then you can't have won it. If you get something saying you just won the Jamaican lottery, but you've never entered it, then it's probably a scam. There's also theft or money by family members and caregivers and in-home helpers. So that's why we have a lot of the managing someone else's money guides to try to guard against exploitation by an agent under power of attorney or other fiduciary. Now, on the next slide, we have information about what you can do to help if you spot abuse. One of the first things to do is to contact Adult Protective Services in your area. You can find the contact information at eldercare.acl.gov or by calling 1-800-677-1116. You can also call your local police or contact your state attorney general. You can go to nag.org to find contact information for your state attorney general. Also, if someone is victim of a scam, it's good to file a complaint with the FTC. You can do that at ftc.gov/complaint. And if the scam involves the mail, the Postal Service wants to hear about it at uspis.gov. So that's a good overview of managing someone else's money and those guides. Now I want to turn to tips for financial caregiving during the COVID pandemic. So the CFPB also has a bunch of tools that we've created to help people navigate their finances during the pandemic. And these can be helpful to you also as a financial caregiver. So on the next slide, you'll see our coronavirus website, which can be found at consumerfinance.gov/coronavirus. Has a bunch of resources in several different languages and videos and audio files as well, so that if people are lower literacy, they can listen to the audio files rather than having to read through all the pages. It includes some very important protections for renters and homeowners who may be behind on payments due to the pandemic. And if you haven't heard, as of just yesterday or the day before, President Biden has now extended the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures until March 31st, 2021. So anyone who's behind on their mortgage or who's about to be evicted due to failure to pay rent should not be evicted under those moratoriums. Now, the foreclosure moratorium applies to federally backed mortgages. The eviction moratorium is broader, and you need to go to the CDC website, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and they have a one-page sheet that you basically need to fill out and give to your landlord if you're in that situation to show that you should not be evicted during the pandemic. Now, on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about some coronavirus healthcare scams that we're seeing, so you can be on the lookout for those if you're caregiving for someone else, so that they don't become a victim of them and so that you don't become a victim of them. Because when you're financial caregiving, if your own finances are stressed, then it's going to affect your ability to manage someone else's finances too. So a big one right now that we're talking about is vaccine scams. Now that the vaccines are available to older adults, we are hearing about scammers trying to prey on people's confusion about how to get the vaccine. And the important things to know is that you shouldn't pay for early access to the vaccine. That's a scam. You shouldn't pay to put your name on a list to get the vaccine. And you shouldn't give your personal information to someone who contacts you out of the blue by text, email, or phone and asks you to give that information in order to pay for the vaccine. Also, people should know that the vaccine is free for Medicare recipients. And for everyone else, the vaccine itself is free, although we may need to pay an administrative fee. But those are some things to know in terms of avoiding the vaccine scams. There also are a lot of scams related to test kits and supposed cures or treatments, air filter systems that scammers say are designed to remove COVID-19 from your home. So if you receive any calls or emails about that, those are also scams. Then another thing to think about are the government imposter scams and the contact tracing scams, which you'll see on the right, a nice infographic from the FTC. Basically, scammers are pretending to be contact tracers in order to get your personal information. And they'll say that you have been in contact with someone who is infected with COVID-19 and then ask for money, social security number, bank or credit card numbers. And the things to know about real contact tracers is they're not going to ask for any money or bank account information like that. So if you get a call asking for any financial or personal information like that, then it's a scam. Now on the next slide, I want to talk about staying connected during the pandemic, especially if you're caregiving for an older person who's not right there in your community. If you're caring for a loved one who's further away, then phone calls and video chats can help connect, just like we're doing on this webinar today. And it's also a really good tool for financial caregiving and for caregiving in general, because you can notice things in the background, like, is the person eating enough? Do they look like they lost too much weight? You know, are they not caring for their appearance or their house behind them? You can notice things on video chat that you may not notice with just a simple phone call. So it's a good way to help with your financial caregiving and caregiving overall. Now on the next slide, we've also come up in the Office for Older Americans the other way, I think, going forward to one saying protecting against fraud while using online or mobile banking. That's good. So we've also realized that a lot of older people for the first time are getting online and doing mobile banking, which is a great thing to do during the pandemic. So we're encouraging people who are setting up mobile banking for the first time to make sure that they set up the security features and preferences, including strong passwords, and use other protections that the bank may have to keep an account safe, such as some banks may let you turn off a card if you suspect fraud. Some banks or financial institutions also may offer view-only access for you if you are a caregiver, which can help you monitor bills or payments or purchases to make sure that the person you're financial caregiving for is not all of a sudden sending $10,000 overseas to a scammer. So those are some things to think about. It's also important to think about keeping track of spending and savings for yourself as a caregiver. Don't forget about your own finances as you're taking care of someone else's finances. And at the CFPB, we have a tool called Your Money, Your Goals that can help you with the budgeting, savings, and bill planning that is involved with managing your own finances. Now, on the next slide, I want to talk about some places where you can get additional help. If you want nonprofit credit counselors, we have a link there. For issues with housing, you can get a HUD certified housing counselor through hud.gov/find-a-counselor. And the Elder Care Resource Locator has tons of different resources for your particular location at eldercare.acl.gov. It's a good way to find out about respite care resources in your way, help identify public benefits in your area, and other support for caregivers. And I also want to tell you about some other information and resources that we have at the CFPB that may help you as a financial caregiver or just for spreading the word in your community. On the next slide, you'll see our Money Smart for Older Adults campaign. This is something that CFPB created in collaboration with the FDIC, and it's a tool for identifying scams, fraud, and other financial exploitation. It has both instructor guides and then resource guides, so it's a great tool if you go out in your own community and give presentations about scams. This can help you as an instructor to give those things. It has a presentation planning guide, it has sample PowerPoints, and then you can order the resource guides for free to hand out to other people. It goes over a bunch of different scams and is available again in bulk at no charge in English and in Spanish. We also have a guide for protecting residents from financial exploitation if they're in a nursing home or assisted living facility. So some people may have an older person they know that's in assisted living and nursing homes. This guide was originally designed to actually help nursing home and assisted living staff identify and respond to financial exploitation, but it can be helpful to anyone who has a loved one in a nursing home or assisted living to help learn about preventing financial exploitation of older facility residents. So I'd encourage you to check that out as well. And last but not least, on the next slide, we have our fraud prevention placemat series. These are now, oh, I'm sorry, there's another resource here first, some guides that we've created to help consumers make decisions about reverse mortgages, financial advisors, and lump sum offers. So these are issues that may particularly affect older adults. And we have simple one-page guides about questions to ask and where to go for help if you're dealing with one of these issues. Now on the next slide, we have some other tips and advice for older consumers that the Office for Older Americans have put out. You can find all of this information at consumerfinance.gov/older-Americans. We have information about preparing your spouse to manage family finances. There's a quiz so that you can see whether you and your spouse are equally prepared to manage the finances if something happens to one of you. There's also information on all these other topics, including planning for diminished capacity, which relates a lot to the financial caregiving topics that we've discussed today. Now on the next slide, you should see the fraud prevention placemats that I mentioned before. And these are now actually, they've become so popular that we've created a whole host of fraud prevention activity sheets and handouts. They were originally designed as print placemats to go out with Meals on Wheels and other meal delivery services, so that when somebody's eating their meal, they could also see a fraud prevention message. But we found they were so popular and all sorts of places were ordering them to put them up as posters or other fraud prevention tools. So that we created them now, not just as placemats, but as activity sheets and resources that people can order on how to avoid common scams. So those are available at consumerfinance.gov/placemats. And again, they can all be ordered for free or printed out for free. And on the last slide, you'll see information about how to contact us, the consumerfinance.gov/older-Americans, or you can email older-americans@cfpb.gov. My colleague, Kate Kramer, works on a lot of these issues, and you can email her at caitlin.kramer@cfpb.gov, or you can email me directly at lisa.schifferle, SCHIFFERLE, @cfpb.gov. So I am happy to answer any questions now, but I'm also happy to take questions from people, by email in the future if somebody's watching this video recorded in the future and has a question. So we'll see if Desiree has any questions for me.
Yes, there are a couple of questions in the chat. First of all, that was an amazing presentation, Lisa. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So one of the questions are these financial guides free?
Yes, great question. Everything on our website is absolutely free. So they're free to download at consumerfinance.gov/MSEM, like managing someone else's money, or you can order them in bulk for free. And that includes free shipping too. So no cost to you to get it. Yeah.
Okay, and then the next question is, how would you set up a representative payee for Social Security? Would that be through the Social Security office?
Yes, that's a very good question. And yes, it would be through the Social Security office. That's the only way to do it. They have their own forms and procedure where you would have to set up to be the representative payee. They are starting a new procedure where you can designate an advanced designation of who you'd want to have as your rep payee if you need one in the future. So again, you should go to Social Security's website, ssa.gov, for more information on how to do that advanced designation. But if someone's already getting benefits and wants a representative payee, then you'd go through Social Security to apply for and set up that relationship.
Wow, I didn't know they were doing an advance payee thing.
Yeah, that's brand new. Yeah.
Okay, and then the next question is, do the guides cover how to start talking about financial exploitation if you believe someone is being financially exploited?
The guides do cover that a bit, but it is, it's very sensitive to talk to someone about being financially exploited. And we hear a lot from practitioners who are on the front lines that people often don't want to believe they're being financially exploited, especially if it's, say, a romance scam, and you truly believe you're in love and this person is in love with you back. It can be very hard to be told that, no, this is not real, and they're asking you to send $20,000 overseas because they're a scammer. It's not really a real relationship. That can be very challenging to talk to people about. Even if it's something simple like a tech support scam, sometimes there's shame involved, although there shouldn't be, because it can happen to anybody at any age, especially older people sometimes, feel a sense of shame, and, the pride is hurt to admit that they've been involved in one of these scams. So it's important to just remind people that it can happen to anyone, regardless of age. It's not necessarily, a sign that people are worried. Older people are often worried that people are going to think they're losing it and, send them away if they admit to being part of a scam. But they're young people all the time that are victims of these scams too. So it's important to make sure that when talking to someone to, make them comfortable and not embarrassed about admitting they were involved with the scam.
That is a good point, yes. The next question is, are there financial counselors to help a caregiver to broach these sensitive topics?
Well, I would suggest that people check with their area agencies on aging in terms of financial counselors, and also there was a slide that had sort of the link for credit counselors. If you're really trying to get help with the financial issues and the credit counseling issues, there are certified credit counselors that can help. But if you're trying to get help with more about talking and relating to the person about these issues, the area agencies on aging are good places to go to find out the resources in your area. And you can find them from that elder care locator link that we discussed before.
I see. Okay, a lot of good information right there. Do we have any other questions? Again, you can go ahead and type your questions into the chat box and we'll go ahead and read them. Okay. Well, I am not seeing any new questions. So, I'd just like to thank you, Lisa, for coming on and sharing this really good information out there to all the Native American people out there. Financial caregivers are always a sensitive topic when you're talking to older Americans. So it's always good to just know more information about this.
Yes, thank you for having me. And I think when people are approaching this subject, it's also important to keep in mind, respecting the elders' lifetime of experience and approaching the conversation with things like, oh, I've always admired how you've managed your finances. Can you show me how you've done that? Or asking them things like, it would be a relief of a burden to me to know that your things are taken care of, because oftentimes older people don't want to be a burden to younger people in their lives. So framing it that way can be two good ways to, start the conversation with older people about these financial caregiving issues and get the ball rolling. And it's important also for all of us to think of ourselves. I know when I started doing these issues, I always thought of my parents, and then it suddenly occurred to me, wait a minute, I should be setting up a power of attorney too. Like something could happen to me tomorrow, you never know. So it's important that we all think about planning for the unexpected for ourselves and for older people in our lives.
That is true. All right. Well, again, thank you. And thank you everyone for attending. And I hope this webinar has helped you, and have a good day and be safe, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.